There was a voicemail on my husband's phone that he didn't know I'd heard. He'd left it on the kitchen counter while he went to take a shower, and it buzzed just as I was setting down my coffee mug. I wasn't trying to snoop. I never was. After 43 years of marriage, snooping felt like an insult to everything we'd built. But the screen lit up, and before I could stop myself, I saw the name. Not a contact I recognized, and the little speaker icon that meant he'd already listened to it once. I put the phone back exactly where I found it. I poured the rest of my coffee down the drain, and I stood at the kitchen window looking out at the backyard, at the bird feeder my husband had built with his own hands the summer he turned 60, and I tried to talk myself down from the cliff I'd somehow found myself standing on. His name is Lawrence. Larry to everyone except me. To me, he's always been Lawrence because that was the name on the letter he wrote me the winter of 1981 when we were both 22 and absolutely certain we would never survive being apart. We'd been together ever since. Raised 2 kids in a house with a leaky roof we kept patching instead of replacing. Watched our daughter walk down the aisle twice. Buried his mother and then mine. Lawrence was the person I called at 2 a.m. when the chest pain turned out to be nothing, and the person who sat in the hospital parking lot with me for 4 hours when it turned out to be something, holding my hand so tight I lost feeling in my fingers. So when I heard him come back into the kitchen that morning, whistling the way he always does, slightly off key, I handed him his phone and said nothing, and I watched his face. He glanced at the screen, slipped the phone into his pocket, and kept whistling. I told myself I was imagining things. That was 3 weeks before his company's annual gala. Lawrence had worked for the same regional insurance firm for 31 years. He was not a man who chased titles or corner offices, but he was steady and thorough and deeply trusted, which is why, at 65, he was being honoured at the gala with a lifetime achievement recognition. The firm's annual event was held every year at the Belmont Grand, a hotel in the city that had real tablecloths and a string quartet and waitstaff who refilled your water glass before you noticed it was low. I had attended 6 of these galas over the years. I had a dress I still fit into that I'd bought on sale at Nordstrom 4 years ago, navy with a simple neckline, and I'd already taken it to be pressed. Then Lawrence told me, quietly, over dinner one Tuesday in October, that spouses weren't being included this year. I put down my fork. "Since when?" I asked. He looked uncomfortable in that specific way he gets. Not guilty exactly, but careful. "It's a company decision. They're keeping it smaller. Just employees and a few key clients. I'm sorry, Rosie. I know you were looking forward to it." Rosie. He hasn't called me that since the early years, when everything was nicknames and borrowed sweaters. "I was," I said. "Next year will be different," he said. "I'll make it up to you." That was all. We ate the rest of the meal, talking about whether our son needed a new water heater and whether the weather would hold for the weekend. Lawrence cleared the table. I washed the dishes. We watched an hour of television and went to bed, but I lay awake. The voicemail, the name I didn't recognize, the way he'd said Rosie, like a peace offering. The gala suddenly closed to spouses, the same gala I had attended 6 times before, where his colleagues knew me by name, where I'd sat beside him at every awards dinner, where we'd danced badly to a jazz band that played every December without fail. I have never considered myself a suspicious person. But I am 63 years old and I have been alive long enough to know that when something feels off, it usually is. I called my daughter the next morning. She lives 40 minutes away with her husband and our 2 grandchildren, and she has always been the practical one, the one who asks the questions no one else wants to ask. "Mom," she said, when I finished explaining, "what do you actually think is going on?" "I don't know," I said. "That's the problem. Have you asked him directly? And say what? I accidentally saw a name on your phone 3 weeks ago and now I'm connecting it to your work gala." She was quiet for a moment. "What was the name? I couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman. It was just initials and a last name. Paxton?" She made a sound that wasn't quite anything. "I'm probably being ridiculous," I said. "You're probably not," she said. "But let's not assume the worst yet." I did not sleep well that night or the night after. I found myself doing things I'm not proud of. Checking the mail before Lawrence did, listening a little longer when he took phone calls in the other room, noticing that twice in 1 week he stayed late at the office for what he described as year-end meetings. He was not a man who'd ever given me reason to doubt him. That's what made it worse. If he'd been difficult or distant or dishonest in the past, I would have had a framework for this. I would have known the shape of my own suspicion. Instead, it felt like learning a foreign language in the dark. The gala was on a Friday evening in December. I had made up my mind to go. Not as Lawrence's wife. As a server. I know how that sounds. I do. I'm a retired school librarian with a bad knee and a preference for sensible shoes, and the idea of me infiltrating a black tie corporate gala in a white shirt and black apron sounds, I'll admit, like the plot of something my daughter would watch on a streaming service and describe to me over Sunday brunch. But I had a plan, and it was not as dramatic as it sounds. My neighbour's daughter, Priya, manages event staffing for a catering company that services half the hotels in the city. We'd become close over the years. I used to watch her kids when she travelled for work. I didn't tell her everything. I just told her I wanted to observe something, and that I needed to be invisible to do it, and that I would work the full event if she needed me to. I would carry every tray and refill every glass. She looked at me for a long moment. "If anyone asks," she said, "you're a last-minute fill-in." "I am a last-minute fill-in," I said. "I have worked harder jobs than serving. I raised children. I managed a school library through 3 budget cuts and a pandemic. I can carry a tray." The afternoon of the gala, I'd put on the black slacks and white button-down that Priya had dropped off, pulled my hair back in a tight bun, added a pair of glasses I'd dug out from the back of my nightstand drawer, readers I'd stopped wearing when I got new ones, and stood in front of the bathroom mirror. I looked like someone's grandmother working a catering job, which is exactly what I was. There was something clarifying about that. Lawrence left the house at 5:30 in his dark suit, the one I'd given him for our 40th anniversary, telling me not to wait up. I left at 6. The Belmont Grand has a separate service entrance off the east side of the building, between the loading dock and the laundry facility. Priya's crew chief, a young man named Anthony, who clearly had no interest in whatever personal drama had brought a 63-year-old woman to his team, handed me an apron and told me I'd be on drinks and appetizer rounds for the first 90 minutes. The ballroom was filling by the time I started my first pass. The string quartet was already playing, something I recognized but couldn't name, and the room had that specific sound of several hundred people warming up to talk about themselves. I kept my head down and my tray level, and I moved through the crowd the way servers move, which is to say purposefully and invisibly, because people at these events are extraordinarily good at looking through you. I spotted Lawrence from across the room at about 7:15. He was standing near the bar with a man I recognized from the firm's holiday card, his longtime colleague, a man everyone called Archie, and they were laughing at something. Lawrence looked relaxed. He looked like himself. For a moment, watching him from a distance, I felt the specific loneliness of doubting someone you love, which is different from every other kind of loneliness because it lives inside what should feel like home. I circled the room. I refilled glasses. I smiled at no one in particular. The speeches began at 8, and I positioned myself along the side wall where the serving staff stood between rounds, and I listened to the firm's managing partner say Lawrence's name into a microphone and talk about 31 years of integrity, of quiet leadership, of being the person the whole office turned to. I watched Lawrence's face. He looked embarrassed and pleased, the way he always does when someone says something true about him. He tugged at his collar. He shook his head slightly like he was disagreeing with the kindness. I almost let myself relax. Then I saw her. She came through the far side of the room during the applause. Young, maybe late 20s, with dark hair worn loose, wearing a deep green dress. She moved through the crowd with the easy confidence of someone who knew exactly where she was going, and where she was going was directly toward Lawrence. She put her hand on his arm. He turned, and his face did something I couldn't read from 20 feet away. Surprise, I thought, but warm. Not the surprise of being caught. The surprise of being found. She leaned in and said something in his ear. He laughed, not his polite laugh, his real one, the one that comes from somewhere low in his chest. I gripped my tray. I did not spill anything. I am proud of that. I watched them for the better part of an hour, moving through the crowd, talking to various people, always finding each other again after a few minutes. Twice, Lawrence touched her elbow when he was making a point. Once, she showed him something on her phone, and he studied it carefully, then looked up at her with an expression I can only describe as hopeful. At 9 o'clock, I took a tray of desserts to the east side of the room and came within 15 feet of them. Can't believe how quickly the estimate came in, she was saying. I told you he was good, Lawrence said, the best contractor in the county. He called me yesterday. He thinks we can be done by February. February? Lawrence shook his head slowly. She's going to love it. I stopped. There was a couple near me examining the dessert tray with the intensity of people making serious decisions about their lives, which gave me an excuse to stand still. She's going to love it. She, not you, not us. I waited. Do you think she suspects anything? The young woman asked. God, no, Lawrence said with the specific confidence of a man who has clearly never considered his wife capable of infiltrating a black-tie corporate event. She thinks I've been working late, which I have been, but not only for work. I stood very still. She's going to completely lose it, the young woman said, and she sounded not cruel, delighted, like someone waiting to watch something wonderful happen. I know, Lawrence said. That's the plan. I took the long way back to the service station. My hands were steady on the tray. I have always been good at keeping my face neutral, which is a skill you develop after 27 years of telling 8-year-olds that no, I could not find the book they wanted because they'd lost it themselves. And yes, there was a late fee, and yes, I was sorry, and yes, I knew it wasn't fair. I needed more information. I found it, as it often goes, by accident. Near the end of the evening, I was collecting empty glasses near the coat check, and the young woman in the green dress was standing just around the corner on her phone, clearly not expecting anyone from the catering staff to come around the corner. I heard her say, "Clearly, Mom, I promise. February at the latest. The whole West Wing will be done." She paused, listening. "Because it's Dad's project," she said. "He wanted to be the one to do it for her. You know how he is." Another pause. "Yes, he's going to tell her about it this weekend. He just wanted to have all the details locked in first so she couldn't talk him out of anything." A small laugh. "You know how stubborn she gets." She went quiet again and then said, "I love you, Mum. Tell her we'll be there for Christmas." She hung up. I stood there with a tray of empty champagne flutes and felt something move through my chest. They had no clean name. Something between relief and shame and a love so sudden it almost knocked me sideways. His contractor, February, the West Wing. Lawrence has wanted to renovate the sunroom since the year our son left for college. We've talked about it for 15 years. Adding real windows, replacing the rotting floor joists, making it into something that actually gets used instead of a room we walk past and feel vaguely guilty about. We'd gotten estimates twice, and both times I'd looked at the number and said, "Not yet, not this year." I'd said it so many times it had become a kind of joke between us. His white whale, he called it. His one room. He'd been planning it, in secret, as a gift. The young woman in the green dress was not secret. She was our daughter-in-law's younger sister, who I had met exactly once at a wedding 5 years ago, and who, apparently, worked in architecture, and had been helping Lawrence coordinate the permits and the contractor, and the whole of it without tipping me off. The name on the voicemail, Paxton, was the contractor. I finished the evening. I collected glasses and cleared plates and folded napkins and thanked Anthony, the crew chief. And I walked out the service entrance into the December cold with my apron over my arm and stood in the parking lot for a long moment, looking up at a sky that was absolutely full of stars. I drove home before Lawrence. I put the black slacks in the wash and hung the white shirt over the laundry room door and changed into my robe and made myself a cup of chamomile tea and sat in the kitchen and waited. He came in just before 11, loosening his tie, and stopped when he saw me. "You're up late," he said. "I couldn't sleep," I said, which was true. He sat down across from me at the kitchen table, the way he always does when he wants to actually talk rather than just exchange words. He looked tired and happy, the way he gets after a good evening. "How was it?" I asked. "Nice," he said. "Long. Archie gave a speech that went 7 minutes too long, which is on brand for Archie." He paused. "I missed having you there. Did you?" I said, "Every time." He reached across the table and covered my hand with his. "Next year's different." I already told them. I looked at him. His hair has gone mostly silver in the last 5 years. He has lines around his eyes that weren't there when we were 30. His hands are the same hands that built a bird feeder and held mine in a parking lot, and once fixed our daughter's bicycle tire in the dark with a flashlight in his mouth because we hadn't thought to buy batteries. "Lawrence," I said. "Yeah." "What's happening with the sunroom?" His face went completely still. "What?" he said. "I know about the renovation," I said. "I know about the contractor named Paxton. I know it's supposed to be done by February. I know you've been planning it." He stared at me. "How?" he said. Not a question exactly. More like a man recalibrating everything he thought he knew. "I have my ways," I said. He was quiet for a moment. Then he put his head down on his folded arms on the kitchen table, and his shoulders shook, and I thought he was upset until I realized he was laughing, that real laugh, from somewhere low in his chest. "You drove me absolutely crazy for 3 weeks, I told him. "I know," he said, still laughing. "I know, I'm sorry. I stopped." He lifted his head and looked at me, and his face changed. "You thought?" "What?" I looked at the table. I don't know what I thought, that something was wrong, that I didn't know you the way I thought I did. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Rosie." "Don't call me that when I'm trying to be serious. I'm being serious too." He reached for my hand again. "There is nothing in my life that you don't know, nothing I would keep from you that mattered. The sunroom. I kept it secret for 6 weeks because you said no so many times that I needed to have everything ironclad before I told you. Because if there were any cracks in the plan, you'd find them and we'd be back to waiting another year." "You're not wrong," I admitted. "I know I'm not wrong." He squeezed my hand. "The February date is real. The permits are filed. The contractor starts the 2nd week of January. And when it's done." He paused, and the hopeful expression came back, the one I'd seen from across the ballroom. "I want us to eat breakfast in there every morning. The real windows. The light you always said you wanted." I looked at him. "Real windows," I said. "Real windows," he said. "Real windows," he said. "South-facing. You said that's what you wanted 15 years ago," I remembered. He had remembered. 15 years ago, in a different version of this kitchen, standing in the doorway of that sorry excuse for a sunroom, I had said mostly to myself that if we ever did anything with it, I'd want real windows, south-facing, so the light would come in all morning. I hadn't thought about it since. I hadn't thought he'd heard it at all. That is the thing about 43 years. The person sitting across from you has been carrying pieces of you that you forgot you dropped. I didn't cry. I'm not a person who cries easily, and I wasn't going to start at 11 o'clock on a Friday night in my bathrobe over a sunroom renovation. But something went quiet in me that had been loud for 3 weeks, and I felt the shape of my own life settle back into a familiar and beloved outline. "You're going to tell me what you did tonight," Lawrence said, studying me with an expression of genuine suspicion. "Because I know you didn't stay home." "I absolutely stayed home," I said. "Rose, I went for a drive in your sensible shoes." He looked at my feet. I was wearing socks. The black slacks were in the wash. There was, I realized, a small smear of what was probably brie on my right wrist, which I had not noticed. "I may have driven past the hotel," I said. He looked at me for a long moment. "You were there," he said. "I'm not confirming that. Rose Marie Callahan." He sat back in his chair and looked at me with an expression I can only describe as completely besotted, which is an old-fashioned word that I have always liked, precisely because it means both foolish and devoted. "Were you serving appetizers at my company gala?" I took a sip of my chamomile tea. "The brie en croûte," I said, "was excellent." He started laughing again, harder this time, and after a moment I laughed too, and we sat in the kitchen until nearly midnight, and he told me everything about the renovation, the timeline, the materials, the argument he'd had with the permit office over setback requirements, the way the young woman in the green dress had talked him into real hardwood instead of the laminate he'd been considering, because she said I would know the difference and I would be right. She was right. I would have known. When we finally went to bed, Lawrence fell asleep within minutes, which is a talent I have never possessed and will never stop envying. I lay awake a little longer looking at the ceiling. I thought about the voicemail I'd seen on his phone 3 weeks ago. I thought about all the ordinary, unremarkable, slightly to the left of what I expected ways that marriage keeps surprising you, even after 43 years. I thought about south-facing windows and February light and the small but precise joy of being known by someone who has had 43 years to practice. I thought about the parking lot at the Belmont Grand and the sky full of December stars and the particular feeling of being completely wrong about something in the very best way. We break ground the second week of January. Lawrence made me promise not to micromanage the contractor, and I agreed to try, which is the most honest answer I have. By February, we're going to have the sunroom we always meant to have. We're going to eat breakfast in it every morning, in the light that comes in from the south, and I will pretend I did not earn it by carrying a tray of brie en croûte around a hotel ballroom while wearing a pair of old reading glasses and a borrowed apron, though, honestly, I think I earned it exactly that way. I keep thinking about that parking lot, the cold air, the stars, the apron folded over my arm, and the specific feeling of being completely, utterly wrong about someone, in the best way I have ever been wrong about anything in my life. For 3 weeks I had been carrying something heavy, not a certainty but a suspicion, which is almost worse because a certainty at least has edges you can hold onto. A suspicion is shapeless. It follows you into the kitchen at 6 in the morning and sits with you while you're trying to read and wakes you up at 2 a.m. for no clean reason. I had been carrying that quietly and telling myself I was probably imagining things and then telling myself maybe I wasn't, and going back and forth until I was exhausted by my own mind. What I did about it. Showing up in a borrowed uniform and a pair of old reading glasses was not dignified. I want to be honest about that. A woman of 63 carrying a tray of brie and croûte through a hotel ballroom, convinced she was about to discover something terrible. There was nothing graceful about it, but I have come to believe that doing something imperfect because you refuse to sit still with a fear you can't name is its own kind of courage. Not the loud kind, the quiet, slightly embarrassing kind that doesn't look like much from the outside. What I also did, though, and this is the part I've sat with longest, was stay honest with myself the whole time. When I heard Lawrence say she's going to love it, I stopped. I didn't decide what it meant before I knew. I waited. I listened more carefully. I let the actual truth be the thing that landed, instead of the story I'd already half written in my head. That took something. It would have been easier, in some ways, to walk out of that hotel having decided I was right to worry. Easier than admitting I'd spent 3 weeks building a case against a man who was quietly filing permits for a sunroom renovation because he knew if he told me I'd find a reason to say not yet. Lawrence has always known me better than I'd like to admit, and I have known him. Known him in the way that only comes from 43 years of ordinary days, from arguments about nothing, and inside jokes, and the particular way he tugs at his collar when someone says something true about him. The thing I forgot, somewhere in those 3 weeks, is that knowing someone is not a thing you achieve once and keep forever. You have to keep choosing to believe what you actually know, rather than what fear is telling you at 2 a.m. That, I think, is what I would tell anyone who has ever stood in a parking lot recalibrating everything. Not that suspicion is wrong, not that you should ignore the feeling that something is off, but that there is a difference between paying attention and losing faith, between asking questions and having already decided the answer. I paid attention. I asked questions, and I let the answer be what it actually was, instead of what I was afraid of. The sunroom breaks ground in January. Lawrence made me promise not to hover over the contractor, and I promised to try, which is, as I said, the most honest answer I have. I think about those south-facing windows and the morning light that's coming, and I think, this is what it looks like when someone has been paying attention to you for 43 years. Not the grand gestures, the specific detail, the thing you said once, 15 years ago, mostly to yourself, that he heard and held and turned into something real. We show up for each other. That's the whole of it. We show up imperfectly, in borrowed aprons if we have to, and then we come home and sit across the kitchen table and tell the truth.